Hello, it's Cried here, with the full Elden Ring patch 1.10 numbers. Sorry, I've been a bit busy recently, and this patch note actually has a lot of changes, despite looking fairly short. There were a lot of things to check, so it took me quite some time. Let's start with the PvP exclusive adjustments. Poise damage of all weapons have been increased, and they're also increased for some spells and incantations for PvP. The easiest way to check this is to use Cryptid's MV spreadsheet, which I am linking in the description of the video down below. You want to go to the PvP Poise tab to check out the 1.10 numbers. But I am going to hide a bunch of rows so we can look at some comparisons between the poise damage in 1.09 and 1.10. I know the numbers are kind of small on screen here, but bear with me. You don't actually need to see the specifics right now. Poise damage has been increased by quite a lot in general, but there is no definite pattern to the increase. However, aside from outliers like the dagger, you will see that the first hit of the light attack chain for weapons tend to have a higher increase in poise damage than the subsequent hits. Reading the developer's mind, I am guessing that they want to make it so that on some weapons, Hit 1 can much more easily combo into Hit 2, but Hit 2 will not necessarily combo into Hit 3. For example, let's take a look at Thrusting Swords. Two-handed Thrusting Sword R1 does 140.4 poise damage, which will stagger even full Borgold set enemies with the Borgold Talisman if they don't have hyper armor. However, this does not mean that passive poise is now useless, because if you don't have 71 poise, you're going to get staggered again by the second hit. This change does make active hyper armor stronger though, as Thrusting Sword isn't even a weapon category with high poise damage. Honestly, I'm not too sold on pretty much nearly everything staggering on one hit, because it can definitely feel like you're spamming your opponents to death. Furthermore, this also makes strong power stance combos that have decent reach and was fast but not high poise damage even deadlier. Power stance spears now do 150 poise damage on both the running and normal L1 attack. Even if you're going to be trading this move with hyper armor, you're still going to take a load of damage and also the counter damage. Power stance straight swords are very powerful and deceptively long because of the step-in. The setup also deals over 150 poise damage now too. However, without passive poise, it is still possible to trade both of these weapons, since they can't just poise through the vast majority of the attacks and outtrade you by speed anymore. Technically, with hyper armor, you can keep chaining into your next attack, while the enemy is staggered. Only time will tell how this poise change plays out. I'll definitely be testing and showcasing a video on a new PvP setup. As for the spells and incantations, not all of the poise values are changed. Here, I have filtered for the ones that have changed, and I'll go through slide by slide. However, most of these changes aren't too significant to be honest, and they feel like they're increased to make sure that they still stagger enemies because of the increased hyper armor. But generally speaking, for spells, there are a few spells like Carrion Slicer, which actually has a poise change that'll matter more outside hyper armor. I guess something like Shattering Crystal that shotguns your attacks has an overall better stagger ability now, but they really don't matter much for the rest of the list. This trend continues for the incantations as well. Flame Fall Upon Them is another shotgun move, so it sort of benefits the same way that Shattering Crystal did. But yeah, aside from that, the changes are not too significant, as they seem to just be changes to make up for the increased hyper armor. Next up, patch 1.10 increased the poise when attacking with some skills, spells, and incantations, and also weapon types that generate poise. They also added damage reduction to these moves, which are basically moves that grant you hyper armor. Now, hyper armor is a very difficult topic to get into, but thankfully, there is a way for me to simplify how much hyper armor bonus 1.10 is giving. I'm going to use the two-handed hammer moveset as an example. The top box is the 1.10 hyper armor information. and the bottom one is the 1.09. You can see that there are two new entries, UNK1 and final damage rate. Let's first talk about UNK1, which is a PvP-only hyper armor multiplier of 0.5. What UNK1 actually does is it reduces incoming poise damage by 50% from PvP sources. This means that hyper armor is essentially doubled for everything. Yes, this applies to even spells. And no, I have not found a single entry where UNK1 is not 0.5. More than that even, if you know a bit more about the hyper armor calculation, reducing incoming poise damage also means that you're getting more poise the higher your base poise is. The logic is fairly easy to understand here, as reducing incoming poise damage basically means you have twice as much base poise during your hyper armor frames. Next, final damage rate is damage reduction when you have hyper armor. In my hammer example, 0.925 means that you receive a 7.5% damage reduction. As far as I can tell, there are two types of new entry for this, and the other one is 17.5% damage reduction. Something I want to mention is that Endure, Stamp, and the Reaper weapon class have poise damage resistance more along the lines of Super Armor, where you have infinite poise instead of Hyper Armor. These Super Armor don't receive the benefit of the damage reduction, although Endure and Stamp already reduce damage due to their effect. There are also weapon arts with Hyper Armor that just didn't get the damage reduction buff. Maybe FromSoft missed these, or have their own reasons. This list is the 17.5% damage reduction category, which has fewer entries than the 7.5% damage reduction. Out of the weapon classes, only the two colossal weapon classes got base hyper armor damage reduction of 17.5%. The rest of the weapon arts entries here do seem like slow but powerful weapon arts, so thematically and practically, I believe this holds up quite well. Everything else gets a 7.5% damage reduction, which includes all the other weapon types, spells, and incantations, and weapon arts. The list is quite extensive, and there is no way I'm fitting it on screen here. I think it's safe to say that it's easier to know what gives 7.5% reduction by checking they're not on the 0% or 17.5% damage reduction list. Also, I am not sure why, I've been hearing some rumors that FromSoft added new hyper armor entries, but there are none. And I know you want to know the full list, so I was about to make one. However, while I was in the process of making a hyper armor sheet, I actually stumbled upon a nearly complete sheet, which I am linking in the description down below. I do believe that it is missing certain entries like flails having hyper armor though. If you made this sheet and end up watching this video, please comment down below so I can give you the credits. And hopefully, you can fix the flail hyper armor too, which I believe shares the same hyper armor as the hammers. Thank you for making the sheet. Critical hit angles have been extended for PvP. Combined with the general critical changes, crits are back in fashion. Crit hits have been widened from 120 degrees to 135 degrees. You do not, in fact, have a longer reach for backstab, but it is indeed easier to fish for a backstab, as I'm sure any backstab lover that has PvP'd after the patch can feel. And just a trivia for the numbers, not sure why you would care, but 120 degrees is a third of a circle, and 135 degrees is 3/8 of a circle. I digress. Next, they have kind of killed Quickstep and Bloodhound Step in PvP. I know that they still cover more distance than dodges, but wow, their iframes are hit so hard. These are the old iframes for Quickstep and Bloodhound Step. The iframes are in green, while the recovery is in red. Unlike dodge roll, these two moves have a directional bias, meaning that they have different frames depending on which direction you're dodging. The new Quickstep iframe is 10 frames. However, the animation is still equally long, and the rest of the frames are basically now recovery frames. Quickstep now grants 10 iframes, while Bloodhound Step grants only 11. To add insult to injury, I don't think they removed the mechanic introduced to nerf these two ashes in patch 1.06. Repeated usage of Quickstep or Bloodhound Step reduces your iframe by another 2 and adds 2 more to your recovery frame. While people might still find usage out of the distance these ashes grant, I'm not so sure they're worth an entire ash versus just dodge rolling on the majority of the setups. Also, keep in mind, these are purely PvP changes. The iframes are still the same for PvE. How is this possible? I'm guessing it is achieved by checking if a damage instance is from a player. If it is, then it goes through. If it isn't, then it is dodged. So even in invasions, Bloodhound Step will still have less iframes versus players than versus PvE enemies. Finally, for the last PvP only change, they decreased the damage reduction for some skills and consumables. For the weapon art changes, the only one that changed is Oath of Vengeance, which now has a PvP modifier of 20% damage reduction instead of 40%. The weaker barriers are nerfed from 35% to 10% in PvP. Protection of the Erdtree gives you 30% negation for all elemental damage at the moment, but it is also modified to 10% for PvP. As for greater barriers, they are nerfed from 60% to 20%. These were definitely OP, particularly against magic damage, as intelligence builds don't really have much of a choice for elements. Just one cast pretty much decided the game as long as you didn't suck, so the nerf is definitely warranted. As for Black Flame's protection, it did not get changed at all. I'm guessing it's because it is a tad bit different from the other greater barriers, and it also nerfs your health flask. As for the consumables, these ones are reduced to 10% in PvP. For those of you who knew that Holy Proof Liver was bugged, it isn't anymore in PvP. However, it is still bugged in PvE and will reduce incoming holy damage by 35%. FromSoft, this issue has been here since the very beginning of Elden Ring, and if someone on the team manages to find this small-time YouTuber's video, please fix your Holy Proof Liver ID. Since you guys do have this entry in your database, you're just not actively using it. I'm not even getting paid for this, it's right there. You even added the PvP modifier for it. As for the Boiled Crab, it now has a 15% PvP modifier. Before we do the general balance adjustments, which are basically all crits related, I just want to mention that for some odd reason, they changed the base poise damage of torches as well. This isn't just a PvP change, so it does indeed affect PvE poise damage too. I guess you can call this a stealth buff to torches, so if you're thinking about trying a torch only run, rejoice. Alright, increased critical hit damage. This category is split into 3 general categories of 5%, 10%, and 15%, with the Great Spear as an outlier for only its backstab. A typical and random FromSoftware move designed to catch unsuspecting people off guard. I exaggerate. But anyways, daggers, colossal swords, and colossal weapons got a smaller increase, probably because at endgame when you have the stats, the colossals can still hit quite a bit due to raw attack power, and daggers already hit really hard comparatively. Even though lots of weapons got a 15% buff to their critical hits, your dagger will still most definitely do more critical damage. This just buffs the other categories up a tad bit to make the weapons feel a bit more impactful for critical strikes, regardless of the weapon type. I think it's a nice change because if you've watched my crit builds, you will notice that even a crit-focused build doesn't have Dagger Talisman as the first choice, since critical hits themselves don't take up over half the damage you're going to be dealing for the most part. I would even say that a small buff to Dagger Talisman from 17% to 20% would be more than fair. As for the other changes, they're honestly PvP changes for when you still do the backstab animation despite missing the backstab. A good change because it feels bad to get screwed over sometimes due to a poor connection. And finally, for the bug fixes, all I want to highlight is the first one, where sometimes you find that your attacks get shifted when you're hit. This is often referred to as aim punch. That's it, guys. Like and subscribe. If you want to support my work, please consider buying my fantasy novel or donating to my Patreon down below. With the book purchase, you can also request a topic from me. Krite, signing out.